Welcome to the Visionary Chronicles, a business strategy podcast where we provide insight to those looking for creative, executable strategies built around the latest disruptive ideas, innovative cultures, product creators, and marketing solutions. Today in the Visionary Chronicles, we're going to take a little bit of a different course. We're going to talk about transformational forces of a business. And I mention these because it's very appropriate and the timing is what I felt perfect to talk about these transformations of a business and what are these stepped processes you need to take in order to not only identify things you need to transform, but how you're going to do it. I thought a quote by Napoleon Hill was great when you talk about transformation. And he said, "First comes thought, then organization of that thought into ideas and plans, then transformation of those plans into reality. The beginning, as you observe, is in your imagination." And I thought that's great because many times people put pen to paper way too quickly. They don't flush out these ideas before they put it to paper. And what ends up happening is this whiteboard keeps getting scrubbed. And so when I look at it, I look at transformation as much about ideation as product is. And when you get people inside of the executive offices making these decisions about what they're going to do relative to where either the economy is, where their business is, where their product is, could be any number of things. Each of those requiring some type of business transformation. And when I look at this, sometimes or more often than not, when we're sitting in there, people make it too convoluted. They make it too difficult. And as a result, more often than not, nothing happens. And so when I looked at it, I said, hey, there's 4 forces of business transformation. If you kind of put these building blocks together as to what does this look like on the decision-making process, it's all about imagination first. And people will sometimes tell me, hey, imagination, what do you mean by that? Well, it's a thought process around thinking through the impact of the decision that you're making. And what happens is they don't look at the entire complexity of their organization, much less their company. So when you're looking at maybe a product change in the processes, well, how does that affect operations? How does it affect the logistics? And how does it affect your sourcing partners? So it's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that need to be put in and mixed around prior to you making a final decision, much less an initial idea around how you're going to transform your business. So when I looked at this again, I said transformational forces, these 4 forces of business transformation. So if you were to look at most decisions made inside those 4 walls of a brand, what you'd find is most don't address all the areas both inside and outside the organization and the company itself. And again, what I mean by that is that all these decisions are made kind of in a silo. And you need to make sure that you're identifying. Now, there is companies that do have that process in place, this transformational process in place, which IDs everything along that process path of who's going to be affected. And you want to make sure that whoever is affected by this is part of that decision-making process and the transformation and understands why and when you're going to be doing it and who it's going to affect. So what you'd find is, again, that most of these don't address the organization as a whole, both inside and outside. A lot of times they'll just do inside. They'll just say, hey, who's it affect inside the company? But when you look at the global sourcing, you look at the global logistics, everything that's involved with commercializing a product, not much just commercializing it, but also producing it, it's a global decision that you're making. I don't care what you're talking about, finance, ops, product, anything you talk about, it's a global decision. So this transformation decision-making, what I call process, takes on a whole new level of importance. And it can be relative to the state of the brand, the economy condition, the state of the community. So each of these, I say the timing's perfect on this because many companies that we have been advising are going through this. Hey, Brian, how do we transform our brand to adapt to this new digital environment? Whether it be D2C, whether it be a digital marketing, the analytical side of the business. How do we ensure that we're getting the proper ROI? Why does our ROAS not go up? So all of these are questions that are being asked by organizations in order to transform their business. So when you look at that, again, whether it's the brand, the product, the company, condition, the economy, state of your community, are they doing well, not doing well? These are all incorporated into the decision-making process to determine the best path forward and alternatives in case you need to pivot. So I put that one in there because I wanted to talk about pivoting. And that's what many companies have done. They'll just say, hey, Brian, let's just pivot. Well, what do you mean by pivot? Have you put a process in place in order for you to pivot? And that's what I want to make sure is indicated here, is that when you make this decision-making process, you need to make sure that whoever's part of and are impacted by these decisions is aware of them prior to being implemented. But you also need to make sure that there are conditions put in place in case you run across another virus, another COVID situation. Hey, what if this did happen? How are we going to pivot, and how are we going to do so, and what does that process look like? So it's an important transformational force, but you also need to make sure that that force has a process once it's been implemented. So these critical factors are determined both inside and outside your brand. And these are the speed of implementation and the internal forces applied to that decision. With these factors comes strategic planning questions. Is this transformation something that needs to happen over time or immediate? That's a very broad question, but it's also something that you need to understand. Maybe you can't do something immediately, but what can you do immediately versus something that takes long term? And on this question, the main concern that I've always had when you ask this question is people overestimate how much they think they can get done in a very short period of time. So I would say under promise, over deliver in that question. Is this something that needs to happen over time or immediate? Immediate is processes, things that can be done internally, things that can be done quickly without impacting the outside world to the extent that they're even aware of the changes made. So think pandemic, think recession. These are things that can happen over a 6-9 month period on big companies. And is this something needed internally or externally? So think processes, think logistics. Each of these pieces of the puzzle is very broad, but has synergies with one another. They integrate with one another. So I like to keep it very straightforward, direct, and simplistic, because otherwise it gets too convoluted and nothing gets done, as I had mentioned earlier. So the more you can pinpoint the forces requiring transformation, the better prepared you are for the future and your ability to pivot when necessary very quickly. And I say it's a great opportunity when I talk to brands. When you say transformation, I say, hey, great. I think that's absolutely what you need to do. Number one, is this immediate or long-term? Number two, is this external or internal or both? Or is it a hybrid? So what I also say is understand if things change like this again, do you have a process in place where you can pivot off a transformation and move in another direction? Or is that also something we need to address while you're transforming? So again, each of these pieces of the puzzle is broad, but has synergies. So the more you can pinpoint those forces requiring transformation, then you are better prepared to pivot. So the first question is slow or fast transformation. It's relative to how easy it is to implement and where the transformation is happening. And it seems like an easy question, but it's not. People will say, hey, that's logical, until you start digging deeper. So quick transitions occur with processes, procedure, management, forces that can quickly adapt. And I say adapt because if you've got everybody involved in that decision-making process and you've flushed out how that transformation is going to happen, it's going to affect internal, not external. It's going to be quick, not long. So these are all things that those processes can be implemented fairly quickly. And slow changes happen when legacy systems or outside forces are integrated or they're being changed. These would be global brands with many tentacles in the marketplace. And this goes to product commercialization, it goes to sourcing, it goes to logistics, it goes to ops, it goes to literally anything involved outside forces in order to get a product from idea stage to commercialization to actually sourcing and then fulfilling those orders through retail. So that's a little bit longer process, and that's where a lot of brands would get stalemated. They would look at this and they would see it coming and they would say, wow, we're 6 months late. We need to make a quick transformation. What are those forces that are making us have to do this change? And when they look at it, they say, well, number one, it's something we had not seen or something that we did not anticipate. So that's the first problem. Now, you can't anticipate all issues. I understand that, but you can be prepared. You can respond and not react. So when we look at this, again, what are these complicated or simple forces that a brand needs to address in order to transform properly? So when you look at this 4 forces, what does that look like in a business? And I've identified 4 forces. The reason I did 4 is because I just want to be a simple building block for you to look at as to what do you need to address. And then from that broad perspective, start drilling down into specific areas of transformation. So the first is the speed. And is this a slow transformation or a fast transformation? And I'd mentioned it earlier, is that on these slow transformations, it usually involves these tentacles, I call it, of these brands. When I talk to brands about transformation, more predominantly on these large cap companies, hey, we can address quick transformation internally. We need to make sure that the transformation realistically is going to be long-term when we start talking about anything on the sourcing side, anything that requires fulfillment of the product, just because of the nature of how that happens. So the speed is going to be slow or fast. So you got first the speed. Second is the location. And I say location because it can be internally or it can be externally. So these 4 factors may seem simplistic, and that's by design. I want it to be by design. If this was too convoluted, nothing would get implemented and your brand will not transform. It'll be a stalemate, and as a result, be run over by the competition who is making transformation changes. So when you're determining if something needs to change, there are questions that you need to ask as well. Number one, and there's really 4 questions that I looked at, was number one, what is the issue? And that issue involves those 4 factors of transformation. Is it an internal, external problem? Is it something that we feel like we can address immediately or long term? Then that brings to the second question. Is this immediate or something that can wait? And then the third question is this impacting our internal team, external partners, or both? And that's critical because, again, more often than not in the rooms that I've been in with Liquid Mind and the brands and also brands that I've worked with directly on a global scale is that they'll do these, what I call these 4-wall meetings. And they'll be making decisions on transformation that affect external partners or what I call external resources. And it's a hybrid decision that they need to be in line with. So lo and behold, they make this great decision on transformation that affects external partners that they're not aware of and they're not in agreement with, and all of a sudden it implodes. So if you're going to do that, understand whenever you answer that with an external partner, number one, they need to be involved. Number two, you need to be realistic about how long this is going to take when they get involved. And external resources always take longer to implement on transformation. So, and then the fourth question is, how do you outline and address where to start? So these are all questions you need to answer on these transformation pieces. Transformation is easy to identify, but hard to implement. So everybody wants the status quo. I don't want to change. I don't want to have to do anything different than I've done before. But that is the heartbeat of a great brand and a great company that lasts for generations, is the ability for it to transform in its own skin. And I say its own skin because I go back to, and this is different than transformation, is that when you anchor your brand in a visionary foundation of who you are, what you do, and where you sell, that's something you never want to change because you are selling a lifestyle, not a product. So this transformation has to be something that is status quo in your brand and your positioning, but something that's transformational that allows you to be more competitive in your marketplace. So by staying status quo, you're effectively putting yourself further behind your competition. So what you want to do in order for transformation to happen is ID issues easily and make it easy to implement and empower people to make change, or at least identify where change needs to happen. It's your brand, your team, and your community. And by putting this process in place for 4 steps of transformation and identifying that prior to doing anything, they will thank you. So stay true, stay authentic, be different, be great, enjoy your journey. And thank you for listening to the Visionary Chronicles. We always appreciate your time. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, any questions, feel free to reach out to me at Brian, B-R-Y-A-N, at liquidmind, LIQUIDMIND, site.com, SITE.com. And I'd love to hear from you. I get a lot of great comments on the podcast and also some great suggestions on what we should talk about and guests that we should bring on. And also look for us on Instagram, Facebook, also Twitter. So if you have any comments or would love to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google, Pandora, Spotify, iHeart, pretty much any podcast channel. So love your comments. Would appreciate any reviews that you may want to give. As always, that's appreciated. Again, look forward to the next Visionary Chronicles. Enjoy your journey. I wanted to thank you for listening to the Visionary Chronicles podcast. And hopefully you find the information that we put out each week very useful. And what we found through reviews and when we were originally putting together their Visionary podcast was found both personal and professional advice as well as information those listening to the podcast were looking for. So we wanted to be unique in that way, and hopefully you found that to be the case. And appreciate the reviews that you've been sending in, and we would certainly appreciate you signing up for our newsletter as well, which is an expansion upon what you're seeing on or hearing on the Visionary Chronicles podcast. And you can find that at 2 locations. One is bryansmeltzer.com, BRYANSMELTZER.com, or our company site, liquidmindsite.com, LIQUIDMIND, site, SITE.com. So we would appreciate any reviews, additional reviews, comments you may have. Sign up for the newsletter, and we look forward to talking with you next week.